Welcome back. Our panel discussion continues looking at the death of 21 teenagers at Enyobeni Tavern in East London a week ago. And as we said, there are many questions. In fact, there are more questions than answers at this point. Let's bring into the conversation Palisa Mokoane, who is cluster manager at Soul City Institute, joining us via Zoom for this conversation. Palisa, your broad take on this tragedy that has played out. There's a lot of questions. One, two, the tragedy itself, the country engulfed in this sense of loss, lives wasted, lives that held promise for the future but snuffed out due to a variety of factors. As you are seeking answers as Soul City Institute, where do you begin? What are some of the questions you yourself have been asking, and what are some of the answers that you can possibly suggest to say, let's start here in unraveling what happened at Enyobeni?
Good afternoon, Tulasizo, and thank you very much for inviting us on this platform. I'll start by just highlighting, obviously, the tragedy that we are dealing with as a country, because in our reflection, this really shows the lack of implementation of policies to curb such issues like alcohol abuse. And, we might delve in, much deeper in trying to understand what does this mean and perhaps how can we then remedy it. We are in a country where lack of safer spaces, lack of activities for young people, lack of, I mentioned, policy is really an enforcement. So in us just trying to seek answers, the first question would be, how did these young people die? What killed them? And from there, then we start engaging in terms of saying, how then was this possible? What led to this? What are young people facing on a daily in order for them to actually end up in such spaces? Now, realizing obviously that this was a tavern, which is supposed to be regulated. And what are the regulations then thereof saying? So as a social justice organization, we always want to hear what are options that are available for young people so that they don't end up there. But those are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves. How come a facility like that is then accommodating young people as the ages that have been mentioned, a 13 to even to a 16-year-old, and actually just selling alcohol to them? But again, Soul City has always looked at issues looking at more of, social and behavior change model. A young person is definitely not an island. A young person stays and is part of a community. That does not to be reactive, but it needs to be proactive in terms of making sure that young people are protected. Now, are we asking the right questions? Where are these children playing? Are they safe? And in terms of that safe, what is the government availing through its different policies or its different structures, the municipalities? If you look at Scenery Park, where do young people go and hang out and be safe? Those are some of the questions that we're then asking. Because you might find that we are asking also, what were the parents saying? Are there interventions that actually assist these parents in terms of parenting? Are there enough parenting interventions that help those parents to even deal or understand the dynamics that young people go through, especially when they are under-resourced in terms of activities that they actually can do? So those are some of the things that we've been really battling with, to saying what is there and what could have actually just helped in preventing all of this. So Soul City, unfortunately, due to lack of funding, what we had been doing also in previous years is look at issues around alcohol abuse, where we had a program that said Phuza Wise, with an acknowledgement that we did not say that people should not consume their alcohol, provided rules and regulations are followed and people are drinking responsibly. It was always a matter of then asking, in these taverns, are they licensed? Are they tracked? Are the inspectors really doing a proper a proper job of making sure that they are within spaces that are demarcated in a way that they are not going to attract people. So what happens there? So it's those are some of the questions that we've actually been asking. So it's important to then just understand that these are some of the questions that we need to ask ourselves on a daily, looking at an environment and say, this is wrong. Are people even reporting some of these things as they happen, or even before they happen? So those are some of the questions to Lasizo in terms of what Soul City Institute has then been grappling with, just thinking and just looking and seeing what is it that we can do as a social justice organization, supporting young people. And definitely we've lost as an organization, because the very same people that are lying on in mob are definitely the ones that needed to be the champion and leaders of our society. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your comprehensive coverage of the socio-economic issues and the rights issues included therein, Balisa, in your first take at this conversation. Let me see if I have Thandiwe Solani from Scenery Park Youth Forum just to weigh in on this conversation. Thandiwe, thank you for joining me. I can't even begin to imagine, let me put it that way, I can't even begin to imagine just how difficult a time this is for you as a community there in Scenery Park in East London. So a lot of questions have been asked. We don't have many answers. But I'm just imagining from your side in the local community, how are you making sense of what happened at Enyobeni Tavern a week ago? And importantly, locate this tavern for us within the context of the community, and the fact that these young people could go to this tavern, and we saw some pictures that had been shared on Facebook, specifically by the Facebook page of this tavern from previous occasions, where people who, without knowing their age, you could reasonably suspect that this person is underage. In those pages, in that Facebook page, they were seen previously holding, alcoholic beverages. So just locate it for us in the community. What is it that would make young people in that particular area in Scenery Park think that, it was okay for them to go to this tavern and drink alcohol in the way that it happened? And why, as far as you can understand, that tavern thought it was okay for them to sell to these young people?
Thank you very much. Firstly, what I'd like to say is we are so confused. We do not know what to feel. We don't even know how we are feeling at this moment, because the tragedy that happened has just taken us off our feet. And secondly, the location of the tavern is within residential areas. So we do not understand why or how it was approved to be there. And then with the kids, there is nothing for the kids to do. As the youth committee of Scenery Park, we have a few things that we were trying to have the children take part in, activities like June 16 pickup campaigns. We've been dealing with NYDA, providing trainings for them. But when it comes to sports fields, we do have a sports field, but the grass has grown so long. The councillors do not take care of the places where the children need to be playing. So instead of being in the streets and using the energy that they have to play, they use their energies in taverns. As much as we are saying that parents should have taken responsibility, we are also looking at the fact that all stakeholders have failed. The people on top of us have failed us as the youth, and now we as the community are taking a stand not to fail the teens that are coming behind us. We now have taken a stand to try and change the situation. So if the government is now not coming on board, then we have taken things in our own hands and we're going to try and change things ourselves. There is nothing for the children to entertain themselves. So they are taking whatever comes to them for entertainment. They are now experimenting with drug and alcohol abuse because they don't have anything to keep them busy.
All right, we'll come back to you in a moment, Thandile. Thank you for your opening thoughts. Lakintiman, thank you for your candor and your empathy and walking a mile in the shoes of the parents and the community there in East London. But you will appreciate that there must be quite a fair amount of anger that is directed at your sector. This is a sector that when it's affected by government regulation, runs to the media and in many instances gets support from other communities and other members of society to say this is a legitimate sector that does legitimate business and it's highly regulated. But as you were saying, you and I know that the scenes that we saw at Enyobeni are not isolated. It's not an aberration. Selling of liquor to underage people, contrary to the provisions of the Liquor Act, does happen. So just your understanding of that anger, that Enyobeni was always going to happen because liquor is sold, including by some of your members, to young people.
Yes, indeed, Thulas, and we're not going to try and sweep this under the carpet. This is a reality that we need to face. And the liquor laws, as we have 9 of them in the country because we have 9 provinces, with each province tasked with managing its own liquor law, they are very tight enough, and the regulations are there and they are clear. And we know that we cannot just put this to be the responsibility of law enforcement officials or even liquor inspectors, which are employed by the liquor boards. The buck also does stop with us as liquor traders because the outlet owner ought to be able to realize that the person coming into the establishment is not of the right drinking age. If there is a reasonable apprehension that a person buying liquor is under the age of 18, then the outlet owner should be able to ask for an ID so that we can verify whether the person is legally obliged to buy alcohol. And we know that this type of things are happening, and we are working with liquor manufacturers to ramp up our responsible trading lessons, as well as ensuring that we have programs that talk to responsible consumption of alcohol. We saw a reasonable success during COVID-19, where we had to be on top of our game in terms of complying with all the relevant liquor license regulations. So we need to be able to go back into that space where we identify areas that have got high incidence of non-compliance and be able to partner with law enforcement officials and liquor board to ensure that we ramp up efforts to change the narrative that seems to follow us wherever we go, that we are just this naughty uncle that doesn't want to contribute anything positive to society. And we do want to do something positive, and we will reach out to relevant social partners so that we can work together. I listened to Auspalesa from Soul City talk about the Puza Was campaign. We'll reach out to her to try and understand how can we work together, how can we assist, how can we raise funding for that organization so that we can be able to address some of these issues that are lending themselves to irresponsible usage of alcohol and non-compliance.
Lakintimane, if this behavior doesn't represent who you are as an industry, and you frown on it, would you be able to point me to people that violated these regulations that were previously your members that you cast out and basically name and shame them? Would you be able to say, actually, we frown on this behavior so much, that tavern in Tembisa, that tavern in Naledi in Soweto, that tavern in East London has been violating, and we want South Africa to know that they don't represent who we are. Because my good friend and columnist Beksisa Mncube reminds me now that this is not the first incident, and indeed it isn't. And the incident that he cites goes back to the year 2000 at Throb nightclub in Chatsworth outside Durban. So this continues to happen. And as I was saying, you and I know that this happens, the selling of liquor to underage people. So the public stand by yourselves that says, to the extent that these taverns are selling to people under the age of 18, we want you to all know we're not responsible for them, and they don't represent who we are, and we should name and shame them. And in addition to any other campaigns you may be undertaking.
Thulas, I will fully support the naming and shaming of these taverns or any liquor trader establishment that continues to operate in the county. But I think we need to understand something very important. Even if we were to disown a tavern, the fact that they are still able to access alcohol mean that they will continue to trade even though they're not part of us. It means that they'll be able to access consumers and trade in alcohol in an irresponsible way. But what we have done, we've reached out to the CEOs of the liquor manufacturers to say that any tavern that is found not to be compliant with all the relevant regulations, we need to institute a stop supply, meaning that this tavern will not be able to access stock from either the distributors or even directly from the manufacturers. We feel that that is the long-term approach, but also given our strong partnerships with all the liquor boards in the country, with the exception of the Western Cape, which is a different conversation altogether, we are able to report non-compliant outlets. And we've seen in some instances, especially during lockdown, where some of these outlets were closed down and they were not able to operate even up to this day.
Tandile, I don't know if you want to have a go at that, what you've heard from Mr. Ntimane around the industry and that the selling of liquor to minors is something that they frown upon, and basically he's heartbroken. Earlier on, he shed tears as he was just reflecting on what happened in that area.
Thank you very much. I understand he is speaking for the liquor sellers, right? So as much as all that he's saying, they are profit driven. So they want to make money. And that's where the issue comes in. They allow the kids underage to go into their taverns because they're making more sales. And there's no responsibility that's being taken. But as much as I blame them, I also blame Liquor Board, because having a regulation saying that no under 18s are allowed, how do you then identify these under 18s? We know we've got departments that are not performing well. So if you are going to go to a tavern every weekend with your ID in your pocket, then you will tend to lose it. So what other ways can they use to identify these underage children? So I'm putting the blame on both of them because they are there to make profit, and then the regulation is not as strict, even though it's there. Thank you very much.
Enforcement is an issue. I did see a story on Times Live that also suggests that even the manner in which that tavern had been built up into a double-story establishment building in that area had, according to that reporting, not been approved by the municipality, which I also again would suggest is sort of a theme that you are likely to find in many instances. Stand by. We continue with our conversation. In a moment, we pick up with eNCA's Aviwe Mdila, reflecting on his interactions with some of the survivors from the Enyobeni Tavern disaster.
My hands.
Welcome back. This is eNCA, our special focus on the tragedy at Enyobeni Tavern in East London. Let me take you to eNCA's Aviwe Mdila, who's had the, you can't call it a privilege, but the burden of walking through the scene, at that tavern, but also the burden of the pain being shared by the various families, including hearing from survivors. Aviwe, the horrid stories that you've been hearing from these young people, is there a theme that's emerging from those who were inside the tavern? Because, I mean, unfortunately, in the age of social media, we've had the unfortunate situation where even those of us who are not reporting on this story have seen some of the bodies, you know, that were in that state that they were inside the tavern, some on, you know, lying on the furniture there inside. But from those who were inside, I suppose that's the closest source we possibly have of a first-hand account of what happened. Is there a theme that's emerging?
Well, one theme that sticks out immediately is that they're all underage. The 21 that passed away are all under the ages of 18. The 7 that we spoke to, my colleague Nabantanganiso and I, are all between the ages of 14 and 17. They're all doing either grade 8 to grade 10. 4 of them were hospitalized and 1 was on ventilators. So the apparent and shocking theme is that everyone that went to Enyobeni Tavern, and something that I'm going to touch on just now, Bratulas, is under the ages of 18. And it's just alarming to think how widespread this actually might be, Bratulas, given that I was speaking to the chief inspector of the liquor in the Eastern Cape. So says that out of 1,000 and liquor license operators there are, the municipality alone, inspectors, Bratulas. So they're clearly undercapacitated in terms of reaching each and every one of these taverns. So I just started to think just how widespread this issue is. But
let me pause you for a moment.
These teenagers, they told us, Bratulas, if you were younger than 18, you were turned around. It's an apparent theme, even in speaking to the neighbors. It's an understood theme in Scenery Park that Enyobeni Tavern is for the youngsters, while there's another place called Umguni where it's for your adults. And even speaking to some of the parents of the deceased, they told us, they're asking questions as to why this particular owner doesn't want anyone under the ages of 20. Because one of the parents I was speaking to saying that if you are younger than 20, you have been turned around. And it's something that was apparent as we spoke to these teenagers. They told us upon arrival at this tavern, Bratulas, they were offered free shots. They were offered free alcoholic beverages that were already open. They were given free food to indulge on. Hence now, in the course of the past days, there were experts just even taking the Habli pipes, taking the remaining bottles of alcohol, taking those food samples as well, taking them to Pretoria for further testings at the forensics there. As I try to pinpoint exactly what led to these deaths, we do understand, of course, it's chemical poisoning, but they try to determine the exact toxin. So we do understand that's happening in Cape Town, where the toxicology lab is trying to identify the exact toxin, but also the samples from beverages and the food are being examined in Pretoria as they try to figure out exactly what was the poisoning behind this. But speaking to these teenagers, Bratulas, they speak of this woman who was a bouncer as they try to make it into the area they call the VIP area that had some sort of spray, and they were sprayed with, which one of them, the one that was in ventilators, he was dizzy immediately. He said he felt like he was going to sleep. But luckily he made it outside, but he needed then to go to hospital. It's just some of the conversations, Bratulas, that I want you to take a listen to as we spoke to 7 boys who are all aged between 14 and 17, youngsters, Bratulas, with none of them even beyond the age of, grade 10. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
Umntongumama une-dreads and ngokunasprayin andithi ngaske nandilali ngungungungu and xa ndiqomama namantsa ngizolala mzosela.
Abantu phayana bebesiwa phayana and abanye bebenyathela, but abantu wawungavi uhamba pha phantsi engathi uhamba emoyeni, wawungava xa unyathela umntu.
Man, apha kwakukho ipost kuFacebook yabo ethi nge-25 yonke nizaba free Enyobeni nathi ke ngosatsaleleni kuba singenamali yoyosela soqonde masiye enyobeni xa sifika enyobeni uthi ufika njena useliswe ishoti xa ungenayo unikwe isavana ezo zasithi gqise zivuliwe yabo so ke naxa uthenga utywala uthenga uphiwe nebhotile ya-free phiwe notywala ba-free yonke into yayi-free phana nokutya sasifumana free phana.
Hayi mina ndibuhlungu kakhulu since ndilahlekelwe ngitshomi yam ebihlala eziphunzana ibinceda omnye umntana phaa qha bamnyathela wabe ephelelwa ngumphefumlo ephela ngamandla phaa wabe elila ekhwaza bama wazomnceda waphelelwa ngumphefumlo waswelekela phaa.
Hayi ndayo esibhedlele but ke zange ndibe buhlungu kakhulu kodwa into eyenzeka phaa yandikhathaza ngoba enye yeetshomi zam endifunda nazo yayiseswelekela phaa ngoba ndiyazi ngoku ndizothi xa ndivula izikolo ndizokuchopha nabantu ngoba ndihlala nayo ideskini.
Ndiyenzeke enyobeni isiphatha kabuhlungu ngoba nathi basiswelekelwe ezitshomi phayana mthozi abazali betshomi bazabo bayazi itshomi thina besoyithatha kwethu endlini sihamba nayo seyenyobeni so ke thina sonqena noyochaza uba kwenzeke ntoni enyobeni so abazali bayasibuza uba kutheni sithatha umntana siphinde singabuyi nabo so ke loo nto siyoyikayo mthozi itshomi yam ifunde ezwe lemfundo ibisithi ojonge intombi yakhe xa ifika phayana wanyathela kodwa kanxelanga wawa wasweleka njalo.
Wena ndoda wangena njani? You are 14 years old. How were you being sold? Awuthengisela utywala wena pha and uziva njani ngoku beseyenzekile le nto nilala kakuhle ikhona into ezenzekayo?
Hayi mina phaa enyobeni ndangena xa kungena abantu aba xa ibouncers zandingenisa ngoba abantu bangekabi baninzi ndangena phaa phakathi xa sifuna uphuma ndakwazi uphuma kobe kugcwele abantu so xa qala ufakwa la paper spray usebangona siphumayo thina kungekavala umnyango phaa enyobeni.
Wayibona le nto ithuthuzwayo uthi i-paper spray wayibona nje befakwa lo mntu wayenza?
Zange ndimbone ngayithuthuzwa ndava ngesmell sayo.
Were the elders or old people?
Phana kwakukho abantwana bodwa phana umuntu omdala wayesixa ingena kuxelelwe naye uba hayi le ivende yabantwana because i-pens down so i-pens down le kuye ke ngoku kwenzelwe abantwana abafunda esikolweni yabo and yenziwe as ipati yo-DJ so yaphela iba i-pens down njalo laa nto.
All right, I'm almost out of time. Mr. Ntimane, let me give you the last word then on this. Where do we go from here? The industry is not going to disappear. It has been an industry in existence for, forever, really, in our country, including under the days of apartheid, regulated or unregulated. In that mix of regulation, policing, enforcement, and parenting conversations, where do we go from here, from your perspective?
It is certainly clear that we need to get our house in order, but notwithstanding that, there are liquor traders that are continuing to follow the regulations and also trading in a responsible manner and supporting their communities. Our hearts continue to go out to the families who lost their loved ones in this terrible incident, which we deem to be a massacre because it's an action of a person that cost the lives of those dear 21 departed souls. But we're also eternally grateful to the liquor manufacturers, Distel, as well as Ultra Liquors, for even come to the party to support the families in terms of grocery. We feel that we need to come together, not just when things are bad, but also to be able to find solutions that will prevent a similar incident from happening in the future.
Yeah, and just very quickly, and it really is, I would say maybe about 20 seconds. You and I can agree that this argument that it's impossible to verify that a person is underage is untenable, right? I know that you cannot verify for sure, but reasonable suspicion, just looking at that, the Facebook page of that Enyobeni Tavern, which I believe I've not seen, I've not been able to see again after I went there. A reasonable suspicion, you can see that this is a person, at least that I should ask, how old are you? What proof do you have that you are this age? Your industry cannot argue that this is a burden that they cannot bear to verify the ages of people, right?
This is not a burden at all. This is something that the liquor traders that are complying are actually adhering to. Yeah. It is those rotten apples that we bemoan that are part of our industry, our sector, that continue to put the profits ahead of the lives of our people.
Right.
That seem to think that it is a burden to ask for a license. But we feel that it is their ignorance that is costing us, that is creating, a dark cloud of our sector.
Yeah.
We don't need this, but we'll regroup and work with the relevant social partners to make sure that we prevent this from happening again in the future.
Lakintimane, I've got to thank you for coming through and being part of this discussion here on eNCA. We were also joined by Tandile Solani from Scenery Park Youth Forum, as well as Palisa Mokowane, who is Cluster Manager at Soul City Institute, as well as our reporters Nceba Ntlanganiso and Aviwe Mtila.